My guest today proves that it's never too late to make a big impact, even if you've spent 14 years in jail for drug smuggling. Dr. Fleet Maull has reinvented himself in his 50s after getting out of prison. He's gone on to affect millions of people through his mindfulness institutes that he has founded, and he's an amazing person to talk to and learn from. Tune in. Hello, dreamers. Welcome to the Late Starters Club, giving you the inspiration, mindset, and tools you need to start something midlife and beyond. Remember, it's never too late to follow your dreams. Hello, late starters. It's your host, Andrea Vall, and I am so excited today to be joined by Dr. Fleet Maull. And I his bio is gonna take the whole half hour to kind of go through if we did go through it. So, he's done an amazing number of things, including the Heart Mind Institute, the Engage Mindfulness Institute, Prison Mindfulness Institute. He's the author of Radical Responsibility, and he has gotten his late start in life after a 14-year prison sentence. So welcome, Dr. Fleet Maull.
Thank you for having me, Andrea. Good to be
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah, good to be with you. And you've had just such an amazing journey in life. You know, had this prison sentence when you were what, about 35? Is that
That's
when?
right. Yeah,
Yeah, after a drug. It was drug smuggling, right? Drug smuggling
that's right.
was,
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, and so that radically changed your life and, forced you to make some big changes in your life. You had a 9-year-old son at the time?
That's
Yeah,
correct. Hmm.
yeah, so tell us just a little bit of backstory on, you know, kind of the before and after picture of
Yeah,
your life there.
yeah. I'll try to keep it brief so we can get on to the after. But I'm a baby boomer. I graduated from high school in 1968, a very tumultuous year in U.S. history. If people can remember back then, the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King and the Kent State killings. It was just a very tremendous amount of upheaval, maybe reminiscent of some of the things that have been happening in recent years here, but um, very unstable time. And at any rate, I was a classic angry young man. I had some alcoholism in my family, and I just arrived into adolescence, young adulthood with a big hole in my gut that I was trying to fill with anything, patch up with anything and everything. And so I went headlong into the counterculture of that time and all the drug experimentation, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the whole thing,
Mhm.
anti-war politics. And I tended to take things to extremes. Had become really kind of alienated from the culture I'd been up. I had a good middle class. You grew up in the Midwest, so I had good middle class Roman Catholic upbringing, and a lot of good values. I mean, basically a very good family, but also some real problems with alcoholism and one of my parents showing up in kind of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde way, and that which was incredibly splitting and for my psyche. And I mean, I didn't realize even back then how much it was affecting me. But at any rate, I was just kind of set up to go into all that, and so I was also always a spiritual seeker and interested in education, and um, I ended up getting I lived as an expat in South America for quite a while, and just because I just really wanted to live outside the system and
Mm,
justified it with all this us versus them thinking, and which fortunately I eventually got beyond, but back then I justified it in that way and was involved in small scale drug smuggling just to kind of live outside the system. Eventually went back to school, did a 3-year clinical training program in Buddhist and Western psychology. It was a really deep 3-year clinical training us to work with people in extreme states, basically psychosis, schizophrenia, things like
mm,
that. And a very deep program, and yeah, I really went into that looking more to deepen my meditation practice and connect with the Tibetan master who started at university, who became my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche.
mm,
And so before I could untangle all of that, I earned my way into a federal prison sentence.
mm,
And so the thing, a lot of people think I discovered meditation in prison, but I didn't. I'd been trained as a
Right.
meditation teacher for a long time, and I had a lot of clinical training and a lot of education and a lot of deep practice under my belt. Um, but I hadn't managed to kind of untangle all that and get free of it. So uh, I arrived at prison with a lot of skills,
Mhm.
and I was just in this hell realm of an environment. And so I became very motivated to create a better legacy for my son, who was 9 years old at the time, than just his
Mhm.
dad went to prison. I was absolutely devastated by what I'd done to him and his mom and
Mhm.
myself and my family and everyone, and really having to face the really unconscious decisions I've been making, selfish decisions I've been making for so
Mhm.
long. And so I became dedicated to really transform myself, get all the negativity out of my life, and do something good with my life in there. And I was in this place of profound suffering
Mhm.
in a maximum security federal prison hospital in the height of the AIDS epidemic. And so I got very involved in either I was a school teacher for 14 years, helped start the first hospice program in a prison anywhere in the world,
Wow.
taught meditation, very involved in 12-step work, led a very, very disciplined, service-oriented life, but also hours a day practicing meditation and studying. I completed all the coursework for my PhD while I was in there. And I knew, it's where I really developed the philosophy of radical responsibility, because it became clear to me early on that I really had to embrace 200% ownership for having gotten myself into that situation, what I was going to do with it, whether I'd be able to survive my time, and whether I'd be able to create any kind of life for myself when I got out. And so I really just, let go of any, really worked on dissolving any enmity I had towards anyone, any sense of blame, and just really focus on my own choices, and working to, really transform myself, and then to really show up and serve in that world where I was. And
Mhm.
so, I was there for 14 years and was able to create a lot of programs, start two national organizations that catalyzed two national movements that are still flourishing today.
Yeah.
And I knew once I knew how much time I was going to do, it took a while, because originally I had this 30-year no parole sentence, and I didn't realize under the old law I was sentenced, fortunately, before 1987. You got a lot of good time if you stayed out of trouble. Took me, I was in prison for a while before I even figured that out. I thought I was going to be 65 before I had any chance of getting
Wow.
out. And then I realized I would serve 18 and a half on that. And then my appeal took 3 years to go to court, through the courts, and they knocked off one count. And so that reduced it to 25. And so eventually I knew I would serve 14 and a half if I stayed out of trouble. And that's not
Mhm.
easy to do in prison. So, otherwise, when you get in trouble in prison, they start taking away that good time in chunks. You even hear some people, I did my time day for day. I don't know if that's something to be proud of, but um, at any rate, I did serve 14 and a half years. And I also knew that once I knew that, the timing of that, I knew I was going to be just short of my 50th birthday when I got out.
Right. Right.
And that it's not easy to start over at 50. It's not easy to start a life and a career at 50. Plus, I would have a serious criminal record.
Mhm.
And I was going to owe the IRS like 300,000 that they assessed me for the drug trafficking.
Wow.
And it's pretty hard, pretty tough to start off that way. And so I just focused on training myself and serving for 14 years and hope for the best. And it really worked out. From the day I got out, I've had nothing but opportunity. And
Right.
I've been out now since 1999, so going on 24 years this spring.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a journey, and I'm very
Yeah.
grateful for all the opportunities I've had.
Yeah, and it's amazing to think about too because, I uh, if you look at all you've done, I mean, you started a lot of programs, like you said, in prison, but you've also done so much since then with all the summits you lead and all the speaking you do and the books and the people you've, partnered with and connected with in being a real force for good in this world. So that's incredible. So that's such a great thing to keep in mind that time is short, but it's also, you can get a lot done. So
There's a
tell
great
me.
there's a great quote. I think people uh, tend to really overestimate what you can get done in a few weeks, but really underestimate what you can get done in, let's say, a year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is so true. It's amazing when you look back and list all the things that you've been able to do. It's incredible. So what is one of the early things you did getting out of prison, age 50? Where did you start? Kind of coming from this space. How did you say, "I'm gonna go start an institute," or, "I'm gonna go start a summit"? How did you get started there?
Yeah, well, I had started these 2 organizations, Prison Dharma Network, which is now
Mhm,
mostly known as Prison Mindfulness Institute,
mhm,
and National Prison Hospice Association. So I
mhm.
started those from inside prison, and so those were
Right.
going. Um, I didn't really when I got out of prison, I didn't wanna burden either one of them with my livelihood, so I
Mm,
was immediately looking to establish a livelihood. But I also really wanted those organizations to flourish. And uh, there was someone who'd been involved in the prison work through another organization, and we were in the same meditation community. Contacted me, and we were involved by correspondence even like the year before I got out, and then when I got out, immediately got involved in the organization that I had started. Prison Dharma Network had been a friend of mine in Boston had been kind of running it, with me kind of as in partnership with me, um, for quite a while, and we had agreed that I would move it back to Boulder, Colorado, where I was from,
mhm,
when I got out, if that's where I released to,
mhm,
and so anyway, but we did, and she got involved, and she also was very helpful in immediately arranging opportunities for me to teach and do speaking events and so forth. So,
mhm,
a few things got started that way.
mhm,
Um, I also had connected with a man in prison. Um, I had brought a training program into the prison about 4 years before I got out, called The Event, and in prison we called the program. I think we called it. Something about change, but, uh, he had, uh, gotten in touch with me because, he had run into some of the writings I was publishing from inside prison, wanted to use them in a curriculum of this program he was doing,
mm,
and we got in touch that way and just really connected. He came to see me, and we were just like long lost spiritual brothers, and, uh, and so I got this really powerful training program that he was running on the outside into the prison, and we did 4 of
mm,
them while I was still there. So I was getting trained in that, and I hope when I got out to, continue training with him. But, and he also had started a consulting company using some of the not the same exact same training technology from that training, which is incredibly powerful, but a lot of the same context and a lot for to do consulting work with companies and organizations. And so I thought I was going to train up and all that, but I couldn't travel when I got out. They I was under supervision. They wouldn't let me leave Boulder County,
right.
and after a while they wouldn't let me leave the state, and eventually they
Mhm,
did let me travel. But so I he came out one time and spent a day with me, introduced me to a few some of the stuff to use in the consulting stuff, and gave me some materials to work with, and then said, "Okay, go." And he also was very kindly set up an office for me. I was living
mhm,
in a halfway house,
mhm,
and he rented an office that ended up being a sublet within a person who's now a close friend of mine,
mhm,
and so I had an office to go to and a phone, and he covered that for the first 6 months. And I remember I would initially walk to that office from the halfway house, and
mhm,
eventually I was able to get a bicycle, and then I'd bicycle to the office.
mhm.
And I was under such close supervision there, if you can imagine. Um, when I got to the office, I had to call the phone monitor and say, "I'm at the office now."
Wow.
If I wanted to get up from my office and go down the hall to the bathroom, to the restroom, I had to call them and say, "I'm going to the restroom now." And
Oh
then I
my
had to call
gosh.
them when I got back to my office. And then
Wow.
when I was coming back to the halfway house, leaving my office, I had to tell them, um, I had to call before I left,
Yeah.
which didn't make any sense to me at all. But and a couple times I forgot to do that, and I'm just about to come into the halfway house. I go, "Oh my god, can I get back and forth on my bike?" Or because they're gonna violate me, send me back to prison, it was
Right.
very crazy kind of time,
Wow.
and, but anyway, I got through that, and once I had a bicycle, I was going around offering my services for free, different places. I did some processes, consulting, design processes for free for Naropa University, for Colorado University.
Right.
I would go around the companies, go there on my bicycle and my briefcase and my suit and hide my bicycle in the bushes and walk in, and say, "I wanna be your management consultant." And,
Wow.
it took me 6 months to get my first paying client, and it worked out really well because at the end of 6 months, he said, "Look, you're on your own because I can't keep up paying the rent." And, I got my first client and negotiated a $5,000 a month retainer, and I was off and running.
Wow.
And, it was a great, gig that I had for about 2.5 years with a wonderful, company that was in the, traditional Chinese medicine field, both publishing and making the formulations and
Mhm.
teaching and so forth. Um, and they were located in Boulder, Colorado. And I really helped them a lot and learned a lot in the process and started getting other clients. So I've always had consulting clients ever since then. Since six
Mhm.
months out of prison, I've had a
Mhm.
consulting business. I still have consulting clients. I'm not trying to expand that right now,
Mhm.
and I've also, as part of that work of doing a lot of process consulting, a lot of design work with companies to help. I kind of got into a niche of helping mostly smaller I worked in some Fortune 500 companies, but I didn't really enjoy too much, kind of too
Mhm.
political, and it's hard to see
Mm.
the impact of your work. I mean, some people are very successful there and
Mhm.
bless them, but for me, I ended up gravitating towards smaller, privately held companies, sometimes family companies,
Mhm.
and I just kind of fell in this niche or of running into opportunities with companies where they kind of hit a wall of scalability.
Mhm.
They really hadn't updated their business model. They maybe hadn't changed in 20 years,
Mhm.
and now the competition was really kind of eating them alive, and they had to change or they were going to fail, and they were up against that wall. And I would come in and take them through long-term change processes. I very commonly had, was with companies from anywhere from 3 years to 12 years, and completely re-engineering the companies
Mhm.
in every aspect: the culture,
Right.
the processes, the systems, the management structure, everything. And I kind of developed that niche. But I never really went into it completely full time because I
Mhm.
was also running these prison organizations and very dedicated to that work. I was also very active as a meditation teacher to both the Shambhala community, the Tibetan Buddhist community that I was part of, and also the Zen peacemaker community. I practice and teach in both those traditions.
Mhm.
So, I had a very varied life, and I started as soon as they would let me, I started traveling internationally, and so from a year and a half after I got out, when I could start traveling internationally to when the pandemic happened, I was just traveling the world, all over the
Mhm.
US, North America, but all around the world, teaching, leadership training, all kinds of seminars, prison work, consulting work, and meditation teaching, leading retreats, and so forth. So it just kind of evolved like that. But in one sense, I was always, through all that period, I was doing well,
Mhm.
earning a decent income. But I was, really trading hours for dollars.
Right.
And you could only do so much, and I was doing a lot, right?
Mhm.
And really rewarding work, and I loved it. And I did all the nonprofit work pro bono for the first 11 or 12 years that I was out.
Mhm.
Eventually, I moved to the East Coast from Colorado, and I left Naropa University. Oh, I was also teaching university for the first 10 years. I was teaching like 3 classes a semester at university
Mhm.
the first 10 years. And but when I went to the East Coast, in order to get health insurance, I started taking a small salary from the nonprofit, and then it
Mhm.
as it grew, and today they pay me a good salary, but um, so anyway, that was the kind of landscape, but,
Right.
I always had aspired to, I've always been very entrepreneurial, so I always
Right.
aspired to actually, really more than just having my consulting business where I'm kind of trading hours for dollars, my
Yeah.
seminar business and all the things I do. I wanted to really create a business that could be more leveraged and grow. And
Yeah.
so now I've actually started 2 businesses in my 70s.
Yeah.
So talk about getting a late start.
I know, and it's incredible too, the summits you do and the institutes that you've been a part of and everything that you've accomplished. Do you feel like there is a particular key to your success with all of this as you've evolved and grown and, embraced change through all of this?
Well, I think I've always been entrepreneurial.
Mhm.
Prior to going to prison, my entrepreneurial spirit got expressed, unfortunately, through the drug trafficking. But even there, I wouldn't say
Mhm.
I was that entrepreneurial. I was just getting enough money to live outside the system and keep my
Mhm.
problems at bay. I never really tried to get rich doing that.
Mhm.
But but I did grow up in a family that had a good small business in the Midwest.
Mhm.
And again, it wasn't like super fast growth, entrepreneurial kind of thing, but a good family business. So I guess I've always had business in my bones, so to speak.
Mhm.
Um, but I kind of became more entrepreneurial, and I kind of think of myself as a social entrepreneur of really,
Mhm.
um, you know, doing well by doing good in the world, and really
Mhm.
trying to, if doing either growing nonprofits or growing for-profit business for the purpose of social impact, for the
Mhm.
purpose of transformation. And I really think there's a place for both nonprofit and for-profit businesses, and the whole B Corp thing I think is a very great model. But I do think the engine of for-profit business can be a great driver for social change and having a very positive impact on the world.
Mhm.
And we're reaching literally millions of people now
Mhm.
with transformational education through our online summits. And
Mhm.
so that before I was traveling all over North America and Europe, as I said, doing workshops with 40, 50, 60, 70 people, right? And it really rewarding work and doing
Mhm.
really personal work, hands-on work with people, very gratifying. But since starting the online work, and both through my online courses and the summits, now started reaching tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and now millions of people in that way, and so able to have that kind of impact. And
Mhm.
so that's incredibly rewarding, and it's all just kind of unfolded. I got invited by um, it's kind of the way life happens. There was a young woman who became marketing director of one of the retreat centers, part of the Shambhala Buddhist community that I've been belonged to for over 50 years, called Shambhala Mountain Center in Colorado, in the mountains of
Mhm.
Colorado. And she wanted to do an online summit. And she
Mhm.
reached out to me because I had big networks of the kind of
Mhm.
speakers she wanted. And
Mhm.
so I was a host for that one and recruited a lot of speakers and got involved in doing that. And I ended up being, a speaker on other people's summits and helped her do a few more summits. She eventually spun off her own company called the Weight Network, is still doing summits. We're colleagues and partners.
Mhm.
And just as the pandemic was kicking in 2020, just as the lockdowns were starting in March of 2020, I was sitting in my living room chair, and I just had this flash that we need to catalyze a global conversation about resilience. We're really going to need to build our individual and collective resilience to get through
Mhm.
this. And so I had this idea of doing a summit on resilience. And I called my wife, and I said, I really think we should do this. And she said, "You're crazy. You're already maxed out." And
Yeah.
she just looked at me, shook her head, said, "You're crazy," and walked away.
Mhm.
And then she came back about 20 minutes later and said, "I think you're right. I think we should do this." And so my business partner at that time, the business I'd started a year earlier, I'd always had my consulting business, but again, it was
Mhm.
mostly just me working, trading hours for dollars. Um, but I had started partnering with this guy. I was giving him some coaching, and he was helping me. We were trying to learn how to do digital marketing, and we lost
Mhm.
like 20,000 the first year in
Mhm.
2019. But I called him. I said, "We're going to do a summit." He said, "Okay." And so my wife and he and I put together this online summit in 5
Mhm.
weeks.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't begin to try to do that today, but we
Yeah.
did it in 5 weeks, and it was really successful.
Mhm.
And that got us into the summit business. And now we're doing
Yeah.
I have two companies, and with both of them, we're probably doing almost a summit a month.
Yeah.
And
That's amazing.
it just it just grew like anything grows. But now, really, I'm trying to apply everything I learned in being a management consultant with other companies to now, very build my own team, right? With
Right.
two
Right.
companies. There's two companies. We have separate teams. We co-op,
Right.
we share resource, but really in trying to do this. But again, the whole thing is about both inside and outside, is about, you know, supporting healing trauma and helping all of us become more deeply embodied, more heart connected, more connected to the earth, more resilient, right? So anything we do, it's all about that. Everything we do is about that, inside and outside. And I think also that's one of the secrets, kind of maybe the short answer to your question was to make sure your insides match your outsides, right?
Mm.
That there's integrity in what you're doing, you really believe in what you're doing, and that what you're doing out in the world is just an expression of who you are and the ongoing inner work that you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that and when you're in alignment with all that, I think there's probably just so much more flow and just things that universe, the road rises to meet your feet, as they say. Yeah. So you've had so much success along the way here since exiting coming out of prison. Is there a time where things didn't work out? You felt overwhelmed, or there was a point of failure, and how did you approach that, and what did you do to get through that?
Yeah. Um, well, in terms of my professional life and now my business life, um, I wouldn't say there have been any major failures or huge setbacks, um, but I've had other setbacks for sure.
Mhm.
I lost my son
Mm.
in 2020, the
Mm.
year first year of the lockdowns, and
Wow.
he had moved. He'd been back in. He was his mom was from Peru,
Mhm.
and he'd lived in back and forth his whole life,
Mhm.
completely bicultural, bilingual, and
Mhm.
he had been living near me, and then he decided to move back to Peru. He suffered from seizures from a head injury he had in 2008,
Mm.
and um, seizures won't usually kill you, but they can
Mhm.
precipitate a
Right.
respiratory event, and we don't really know what happened. His mom, he had built a small house for his mother to live in the Sacred Valley of the Incas, a very magical place where I'd spent time years earlier, and where we'd gotten a small property in recent years. And So he built a small house for his mom, and then built another one for himself in this little compound. And so
Mhm.
she had gone to check on him and found him, and he was already gone. I mean, she got me
Oh,
on the
wow.
phone right where we were trying to figure out, but pretty quickly realized he was gone.
Yeah.
And that was beyond devastating.
Right.
I
Yeah.
really
Sorry
had
to
to
hear about
use
that.
all of my training that I've been
Mhm.
using and all the deep meditation practice and self-regulation practices and just everything I train and teach. I really had to work on going through that grieving process in a way
Mhm.
that has been profoundly healing and transformational, but nonetheless, just devastating. And of course, it's
Mhm.
an ongoing journey. Although I'm in a really good place now. I mean, I have a big photo of him right where I do my meditation practice every morning,
Mm.
and when I see his face, I just smile. I don't like collapse into grief like I would have,
Right.
not that long ago. But today, I pretty much just a smile of joy comes to my and appreciation for the time I had with him.
Right.
Prior to that, uh, the woman who had been my off and on again girlfriend before I went to prison, and during my prison years, we were both very clear that she needed to go on with her life.
Mhm.
But we stayed in close touch and became very close friends. And when I got out, we were actually considering whether maybe to get back together. She was living
Mhm.
in Canada and had a daughter there and couldn't really just uproot herself. I couldn't
Right.
leave where I was, but, about a year after I got out, she contracted cancer, and from the
Oh,
moment
wow.
she knew she had cancer to the moment she passed was only about 45 days.
Oh my gosh.
And, in
Wow.
fact, that's how I first got a passport was I got the US government and the Canadian government to agree to let me go up there,
Mhm.
to see her, and I
Mhm.
got up there and spent a couple days with her the week before she died.
Mhm.
So that was absolutely devastating, and it
Right.
it threw me into a deep depression, first time I'd
Mhm.
ever really experienced that. I mean, the whole time of my prison years, depression was kinda right there, like this
Right.
abyss, but I just was committed to not going there,
Right.
and, it wasn't that I wasn't dealing with my stuff, I was in deep spiritual processes, but I was just clear that, that's an abyss that I'm not, gonna let myself collapse into.
Mhm.
But just after Karen died, it was like a physical depression. I felt like I
Mm.
was swimming through mud. I
Right.
really had a hard time even getting up and dressing myself in the morning. I had to keep working, so I just, pushed through it, right? And it was about 6 months, and then the physical part of the depression just lifted one day. The
Mhm.
grieving, process continued, but and then, I had already lost both my parents. I lost my dad 6 months before I got out. I lost my
Oh,
mom
wow.
6 months after I got out.
Wow.
One of my greatest hopes was for them to see me out and doing well. I think by
Mhm.
that time they knew I would do well, but
Right.
I really wanted to have time with them and for them to see me
Right.
doing well. And so that was devastating, and then losing Karen a year after that, and then, I very fortunately, met a woman who was in our meditation community. That I'd actually known her and her sister before I went to prison. We were
Mhm.
friends. I was never involved with her, but we connect started dating, and really, we didn't end up getting married. We would have. I mean, we were basically life partners.
Mhm.
And she died of cancer in
Wow.
2008. In fact, my son went through his head injury in Peru
Mhm.
and was maybe never, we didn't know if he'd ever be functional again.
Mhm.
A very severe head injury. He was in a coma for 7 days. I was down in Peru sitting by his bedside. And then we had to eventually smuggle him out of Peru and
Mm.
try to get him into a good head care clinic in US, and
Right.
they weren't doing anything for him. Eventually I had to take him out of there. It was costing me, that whole thing, that whole episode with him threw me into deep financial debt. It cost me
Right.
like 100,000 out of pocket,
Wow.
and threw me into deep debt. And eventually got into a retreat center a friend of mine had, and we didn't know if he could stay there, if they could handle him because he was just totally inappropriate, belligerent, violent. So he
Mm.
was just
Mhm.
nuts. He had frontal lobe head injury, right? And
Right.
not physically violent, but on the verge. Threatening to
Sure.
be. He was just crazy.
Mhm.
And but eventually, I guess the blood reabsorbed in his brain, and he was himself again.
Yeah.
And actually, but that was all happening while Denise, my partner, was on hospice care, dying of
Oh my
cancer.
goodness.
So I mean, just
Wow.
in really tough times, and fortunately, he recovered. I did lose Denise, and I really regret having never really asked her, "How am I supposed to continue living without you?" The
Mhm.
grieving process just really, you know, I
Yeah.
kept going with my life, but I was an absolute mess for the first year after she died. And, uh, I thought probably, that that's it for me.
Mhm.
But very fortunately, I met my wife, Sophie. I don't know, it's been 6 or 7 years ago now. We've been married for, let's see, we got married in 2020, right?
Yeah.
Not long before my son was at our
Oh,
online
wow.
wedding.
Oh, wow.
And so 23, I guess we're going on 3 years, and
Yeah.
so I feel
And there's
very, fortunate in
yeah,
that
and
way. But
there's
I've been through these,
right.
I haven't had any really huge business losses other than
Sure.
the financial challenges with my son. Really, I've been
Right.
in, deep debt and having to dig
Mhm.
myself out of debt because of that. Um, but professionally and business wise, things have mostly worked pretty well. But
Yeah.
I've had personal challenges that have been very, very
Right.
intense.
Right, and that, is also amazing, and first of all, like, I love that, you got married in 2020. That's another late start, right? It's never too late for love, right? But, what's also amazing is that I think we take a look at these accomplishments that are easy to see on paper, and we forget how much can be going on in someone's personal life that is such a struggle, but you're still able to do so much. So that is just amazing. And congratulations for making it through all those really difficult, tough personal challenges and still be able to do wonderful things in the world. So
Well,
that's
thank you,
great.
and I really credit that. I mean, I all everything I teach in the world, which is all it's really all at the intersection of um, ancient ancestral wisdom, um, our profound contemplative traditions,
Mhm,
and in really all. I'm a great lover of all the great contemplative traditions and
mhm,
all the major religions and so forth. But I've been most deeply trained in various Buddhist traditions, but contemplative Christianity, contemplative Judaism, Sufism, the Vedanta, the Vedic traditions, yoga. I'm a deep lover of all that work, and so and then neuroscience, and so the intersection of the contemplative traditions, ancestral wisdom, and neuroscience, and positive psychology, all of that work is and what I teach and what I've been training myself in all these years. And I lead a very disciplined life. I spend the first 2 hours every day in meditation and
mhm,
self-care and breath work, and so I've built a really resilient nervous system and
mhm,
mind, and it doesn't mean that I don't still, that things aren't incredibly devastating when they're devastating, but
mm,
I have the ability to work with it, and I really
mhm,
um, I credit that work and my ongoing everyday daily practice for keeping me in the place where I can move through these kind of challenges and continue to get out and show up in the world in a good way and serve.
Right. Right. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, I want to ask you one final question that I love to ask my guests. If you have a quote or inspirational saying, something that powers you through, and I'm sure you probably have a whole host of them, but share a little bit of wisdom with our listeners here.
Well, I'm going to share two with you, very short.
Yeah.
One is kind of paraphrasing Marcus Aurelius, who was sometimes called the last good Roman empire, Roman emperor. He
Mhm.
was a Roman emperor, and he was also a Stoic philosopher. And his meditations are very famous, his contemplations. And anyway, kind of paraphrasing him, that most people uh, think their destiny is controlled by their circumstances, but in fact it's not. It's our destiny is created by our response to those circumstances. So that's one. And
Right.
then the other is from my teacher Chogyam Trungpa, and a quite famous quote by him, and it's very short: chaos is good news.
Wow, I have never heard that one. Chaos is good news. That is interesting. So that
Mhm.
just just to kind of unpack that a tiny bit before we sign off, basically saying it's good for you or good,
He was always turning everything on its end, right? And
right?
but the obstacle to an awakened life are all the conceptual structures that we create to try to cope with life. And
Right.
and all the ones we've inherited through childhood and through our culture, and we live in this constructed world. We don't really live in the real world. We live in a constructed world. And so chaos is one of the things that can help us allow that to deconstruct, to break that up, and actually get in touch with reality as it is. And if we have, spiritual practices that allow us to access expanded states of consciousness and awareness, to where we're going to really get in touch with the vastness of life and being as it really is, instead of living in this small conditioned box
Mm.
that's basically, no matter how high functioning we are, it's still basically fear and survival based. And
Yeah.
so chaos is one of the things that challenges us to let those things go, or can somehow,
Yeah.
a lot of people who've had amazing lives, or profound experiences, went through profound change, what often precipitated that was an incredibly challenging, difficult thing they went through.
Right.
Suddenly their well-ordered life erupted into chaos, but on the other side of that, they're a transformed human being. So I think he meant that both individually and collectively, that
Yeah.
chaos is good news.
I love that. I love that. That's why I love asking that question, because I always come up with find new inspiration from people who are doing amazing things in the world. So, Dr. Fleet Maull, thank you so much for your time here. I'm sad it has to come to an end so quickly, because it just you've got amazing wisdom and stories and things to help people get through chaos or and so we'll have all kinds of links in our show notes for how people can get in connected with you through the Heart Mind Institute, through your book, the Radical Responsibility, which I've read the first chapter. Can't wait to dive in further to that. And thank you for your time.
Well, you're very welcome. And people can get that first chapter for free online at radicalresponsibilitybook.com. They can
Yeah,
download a free chapter if they would like to.
exactly. Yes,
Mm.
yes, definitely go do that, because it's so far powerful, powerful read. And like I said, can't wait to keep going. All right. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Andrea.
Mm. Hope that was helpful, and make sure you grab the free guide, Top Tools for Late Starters, on the website at latestartersclub.com. And let's turn dreaming into doing.